Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Morgan, and this channel is just about stuff like low waste living, minimalism, veganism, whatever theme of consciousness that you want to explore. No, just kidding. I'm not a guru or a perfect person in any of those things, maybe except for veganism, because I do not give up on my ethical values. But today I'm going to be talking about a quite delicate topic, which is the topic of sterilization. So if you feel triggered, or you know that you might feel triggered in any ways by this topic, then please don't feel any obligation to keep watching and keep listening to me. This is just my story, my experience, and how I came to the decision of getting sterilized, and why I do think that having children, especially in this day and age, is not an ethical decision. I will be talking about other reasons that motivated me to get sterilized and how the surgery went. Basically all the information that I was able to gather in my experience. Without further ado, let's get into it. I will be first talking about the path that led to that decision. The first thing I guess I want to mention, and I think that some people just get mistaken when it comes to that topic and think that people who do not want to have children basically just hate children, and I think that for most of people it's not the case. And even if you don't like children, I wouldn't have like anything against you. Like, you don't have to love roses, or I don't know, whatever the yellow color. You don't have to love makeup or decor stuff. You don't have to love video games, as long as you don't mistreat children, as long that you don't torture children. Of course, there is nothing basically wrong with not liking children. So it's not my case. I do not like children. I do only like specific children in specific cases. I just didn't feel the need to create any children. So where that began, I think, where I was confronted with the question, do I actually want to have kids or not? I think I felt pretty sure that I didn't want any. One thing that kind of bothered me at some point is when I was living in Scotland during my studies, and one friend of mine asked me if I wanted to have children, and I basically answered no. Like, that wasn't anything that I was considering in my near future. And this girlfriend of mine basically answered something like, oh, just wait for it. Like, your biological clock, or whatever the term for that is, will just start ticking at some point, or like your motherly instinct will start kicking in. And I think that's something that's quite like narrow-minded, and like, you cannot just assume that everybody wants children or must have children, basically. I feel like in most of society, it's just, kind of assumed and taking for granted, like, at some point, you're gonna have to want to have children. This is just like, it just happens. Like, you're gonna get the house, and you're gonna get the job, and then you're gonna get the children. It's just like everything that fits in the box, and that's everything we've ever known. So that's how it's supposed to be, and you should want this. And that wasn't the case for me. I guess there was a point where I watched a lot of Ellen Fisher's videos. If you don't know her, is basically a vegan mother, and she lives with her vegan family in Hawaii. And by now she has 5 children, which at some point I thought it was like excessive, and I don't think that's a reasonable thing to have in this day and age so many children, and to be having more children within the society that we are living in, and knowing basically that people are suffering no matter what happens, no matter what kind of life you have. At a certain point you will suffer. It's basically the only thing that's actually guaranteed in this time of living. And I think that the future, in my eyes, has never been so unsure, uncertain, and so uncontrollable, let's put it that way. So I don't think that's a reasonable thing to be having children now. But what was disturbing to me is that at some point I was almost, although I was quite sure that I didn't want to have any children, just watching these videos and just seeing this image, this picture of the perfect family, and not being really shown like any imperfection, just watching these videos kind of like made me want to have this experience, to maybe not going through the process of giving birth, but like having children, being with them, experiencing their personalities and so on. Just watching these videos, it was kind of like romanticizing the concept of having children. And I think that it definitely lacks some perspective sometimes, some other perspectives in these videos. And she was talking a lot about pain-free birth, which I find quite fascinating. It's even possible. But I just like started seeing that in a more critical way, and questioning if it's even ethical to have children at all. Progressively, I just became more and more conscious about other aspects that might be involved in the process of having children and raising them. And I started to be always more sure about my decision not to have kids, because I was also getting so more conscious in different aspects of my life regarding veganism. At first, of course, that's something that that was the main point where I started in my life to open my mind and think more critically in other aspects, in other domains. And then I became living a more minimalistic way of living. I became buying secondhand, and by now we just only buy secondhand stuff, or just like find stuff on the street. It doesn't come into question that we would buy something new. Like, I would never do that again, because I just think it's a waste of resources, and I do not think that it's ethical in many aspects, depending on the companies that produce stuff, and the conditions, the working conditions for people for many products in many industries are not ethical. We can see in certain aspects that the climate is a bit changing, that depending on where you live on the planet, and depending on the number of people who live in the planet, and this number being constantly increasing, it's quite obvious that at some point there are just going to be too many people on this planet to be able to have basically a standard of living that is qualitative for everybody. Like, you cannot basically think that for the rest of your life you're going to be able to buy anything you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. You're going to be able to travel as much as you want. Like, certain things that we take for granted right now, I think at some point are not going to be as easy, or maybe are not going to be able at all. So that's something that just became really present in my mind. 2021, that's where I had my second experience with plant medicine, and that was with truffles. Some might call them magic truffles. You can go and check out my podcast episode that I did on this. There was a moment during that experience where I truly felt like in my skin, in my heart, I just felt this feeling that I was letting go of the wish of having children at all. It felt like a relief, and I just felt it in all parts of me. And that was the moment where I was like, wow, now I know, now I'm certain there is no going back, and I'm not having any regrets if that's how my life is gonna be from now on. So that was like the first thing that I just felt. And then in that same year, end of 2021, um, I had a surgery to remove some part, um, like there were some infected cells in my uterus. Um, I think I don't know if it's the term in English, the papilloma virus. Um, so it's basically a sexual disease infection virus. And I made a video on that topic as well, but in German. Uh, if you happen to know German, you can check it out. And I made a quite complete video on this topic. Yeah, it just like confirmed to me that I did not want to have children. Um, and then last year, 2022 summer, um, I yeah, I mean it happened like several times, but this time it was even longer. Like my periods were late, like about 2 weeks, I think. And then I was just getting more and more scared, more and more afraid of just having the possibility and imagining the possibility that I was pregnant. Like, even though we use condoms and those we get as well, like they're in a new condition, but we buy them secondhand, like just from another person who didn't use them. So that's something you can do if you want to be living even in a more minimalistic way. That's possible. I had to be sure that I wasn't pregnant, so I did 2 pregnancy tests because I read online like somehow with the first test, like you cannot be sure that it's like 100% sure that you're not pregnant because something with your hormones might be going on. So you have to do a second test, like to be really sure. And I was like basically disgusted by myself just by the thought of having created a new demand for plastic, because obviously pregnancy tests, I mean, I don't know about any pregnancy tests that are like made of paper or like any I don't know, like what's the word, yeah, anything that basically that's not plastic and that's more ecological. So doing that was already like, it felt so wrong to be creating that new demand for plastic. And then maybe in the 1 minute, I think it lasted like 1 minute before you get the result, I was paralyzed in the biggest fear I had experienced in my whole life, just waiting for the result and just like having this picture in my head. I just thought, okay, if that comes out as I am pregnant, like my life is basically ended. Like I will never be able to enjoy my life as much, and that would be just like such a horrible experience for me. And that was one critical moment where I decided, okay, I think I'm going to have to get sterilized because I do not want to have this experience ever again in my life. And then by end of 2022, we adopted a little dog child. So I am a mother, but the mother of dogs, the mother of Sky, which is, well, now he's a vegan dog. He's been a vegan dog for 9 months and he is thriving at our home, and it's been a joy. But also from the very first day of his adoption, I realized as well that this was just so much responsibility. So it became clear to me that if I couldn't ever be a mother to a child, because that would just take so much of my own life quality. I would be having so many responsibilities, and I just didn't want that for myself. So that's, I think, the point where I started thinking about surgery, like getting sterilized. On Instagram, I just did a poll and someone asked what were the risks going into surgery. So what can happen during, by the way, the surgery in itself, what I did is called a tubal ligation of the fallopian tubes. So these are basically either cut, tied, or blocked. In my case, they were cut. So I would say it's about like a 2 centimeter to 3 centimeter cut that's done there, or incision. And that's like a super smooth, fast surgery. I think it takes like between 15 to 30 minutes. You just basically go to the hospital and then come back home on the same day. The risks of this surgery, so yeah, depending on the surgery, like your state of health, like how healthy you are going into surgery, and so on. Maybe depending on your nutrition as well, that's a big factor. If you have a good sleep, etc. There are other factors that play into this. But what could happen is damage done to nearby organs or to blood vessels. There could be an infection, inflammation, especially of the wounds that could happen. And something that's really rare that can happen after surgery, anytime in your life after surgery, that could be an ectopic pregnancy. So that's a pregnancy that occurs outside of the uterus, but that's really, really rare. The surgery went super smoothly and fast in my case. So I basically had the first appointment with the doctor who did the surgery on June 26th, and I just had a talk with him, a really, really nice man, and he asked me some basic questions like if I was conscious about everything that was involved, if I had talked with my partner about this, and what were my motivations. And I didn't experience any opposition or like gaslighting or whatever. Like the doctor didn't try to prevent me from making that decision. So it was just a nice feeling. And I was lucky enough to have a friend who knew a friend who had been sterilized by that same doctor. So then I just contacted her, asked her how was her experience, and also it happened to be like at the end to cost much less than what a sterilization would cost normally in Germany. It can vary from 800 to 1,000 euro in Germany, and I only paid like a little less than 200 euro. If anyone living in Germany wants to have the contact details of this doctor, and then just feel free to contact me. Reach out here or on Instagram. That's a great method of contraception. Yeah, I mean, it's the best. It's one of the best methods of contraception, of course. And that felt good for me as well because I had experienced a DUI. DUI, I think, is the term in English. Yeah, I used to have that as a contraception. If you're aware of the toxic shock syndrome, I really recommend, if you don't know about this, I really recommend to check out the podcast episode on the Diary of a CEO with, I think, Lauren Wasser. She lost both of her legs because of the toxic shock syndrome, which can occur through wearing tampons, but also through wearing a cup. So just check that out. So basically, I didn't want to have anything in my body anymore as a contraception method. So that's why sterilization is basically one of the best methods. As for the surgery, what can happen afterwards is that, yeah, you're of course very bloated because they insert gas into your belly, and I will put a little like insert of basically how a tubal ligation occurs. So what's basically done in the uterus, I mean, like to the fallopian tubes, and so they insert this gas, CO2 gas, to get your belly a bit bloated, and then they insert the camera through the belly button, and then you have a little incision as well, like in your pelvis, where they insert the instrument with which they're going to cut the fallopian tubes. So afterward, you've got some bloating happening due to the gas. Some people can have some pain in the shoulders, which happened to me because of the gas. That's basically, it's kind of like hitting on some nerves, and yeah, those nerves are like related to the shoulder. I wouldn't say that the next few days were painful, or like directly after surgery it wasn't really painful for me. The feeling that you get is like the kind of little pain that you have before you get your period, and for me it was never really intense. So I just woke up from surgery like that, and then the next few days the bloating is not so comfortable. So yeah, I had to wait like basically 4 to 5 days until the gas was like completely gone, and then I was able to walk in a really like in a quite fast pace again, to walk with my dog, for example. And then 2 weeks after surgery, I just got back into my training routine. And that was, yeah, that was actually it. But if you want to know more about the whole experience in German, you can look into my Instagram highlights, childfree, and then I talk in detail in German about this. The reasons really that push me, and why I consider having children in this day and age unethical, and also some parallels that can be um, drawn in comparison to veganism, which I did in my case. The parallels that I saw, the first thing that I want to say is that, as we all know, and we've heard this phrase so many times, my body, my choice. That's a very feministic phrase. And I think that this phrase should prevail in just so many areas. It should prevail for humans, for animal individuals, as well as for non-animal individuals. We should all have the right to be able to decide, to have control over our bodies and decide what we do want to do with our bodies. But in one case, if I choose to get sterilized, that's only my body by my choice. But I think that sometimes some people might forget that when you do choose to have a child or to have several children, this is not the phrase "my body, my choice" doesn't work anymore, because obviously we have two individuals, the one person choosing to have a child, but one individual in that case cannot decide, cannot basically say "my body, my choice." The baby that is about to be born does not get to give his or her or their consent. So I think that's one thing for me that was critical, and where I also drew a parallel to veganism, because basically in veganism it's just all about leaving animals alone and giving them the right to choose, to have freedom over their bodies, the freedom not to be exploited, the freedom not to be killed. And also because they cannot express their consent to us, we do not communicate yet, we're not able to communicate with them yet, so that they could give us their consent. if we wanted to do anything with their bodies. And in that case, because the individual is not yet born, this individual cannot give their consent to be born. And that's, for me, I would say, the main reason why I do not want to have kids, because I do not want to impose living, especially living in this day and age, and living in suffering, in difficult times, living maybe the risk of living in poverty, and so at some time living in not knowing what the future might look like. I do not want to impose this on someone who's not able to give their consent. Like I've already talked about suffering. With suffering comes trauma, and I think that no matter how you were raised, no matter in which family you were brought up, I was raised in a quite happy, okay family, I would say. I was not abused physically, neither physically. Well, at some point, if you consider slap on the butt or slap in the face, that's physical abuse, definitely. So you could say I was abused to a certain extent, physically and mentally, because I do have some trauma from my childhood, and I've talked about this as well in my podcast. So even if I was raised in a quite wealthy family and with quite positive values and in a positive environment, I still have trauma from my childhood, and I worked on that trauma, and I had pain left from my childhood that I had to deal with as a grown-up. So trauma is going to be present for anyone. I'm convinced, that's my opinion, that anyone, no matter the conditions, the factors that influenced your education, basically, I think that anybody just grows up with some extent of trauma. And basically, yeah, I do not want to impose this on anybody. I do not want anybody to struggle to earn a living, because basically in the world we're living, we have to pay in order to live. We have to make money in order to keep breathing in most countries, because with the technology that we have right now, we've become so depending on it that we probably wouldn't be able, for most people, not most people, because I guess most people on earth are actually quite poor, and they do not live with the technology that we have in European countries or in the US. But as for my case, if I wouldn't be able to live without technology, to find enough food to survive, so where I live right now, I have to pay in order to live. I wouldn't want anyone to experience the loss of their parents. I wouldn't want anyone to experience maybe one of their parents or both of their parents committing suicide. I wouldn't want anyone to experience health problems, because you never know if you're ever going to get cancer or any kind of disease. And that's something that some people have to go through in their life. Of course, you might say that some people are stronger mentally than others, and some people might get through most of this mentally. But fact is, some people cannot, and some people cannot live in this world because they don't have maybe the social capacities, they don't have the mental capacity to live in this world. Who are we basically to impose potential situations onto someone, to subject them to potential scenarios and situations just because we wanted to have a kid? Most people, they just take their own opinion into consideration, not really caring about what the individual wanted who is not born yet. Also, something that I've heard and that I find quite messed up, that some people gave as a reason for having children, was that basically we have to raise children who are more conscious, we have to raise more conscious generations who will save the world, who will have better values, better ethical values, and who will save the world, basically. And I think that's such a quite fucked up way to think, to put that burden on someone's shoulders. What if that person doesn't want to save the world? And what if that person doesn't have the capacity or just, yeah, the will to save the world? It's not anyone's responsibility to save the world. It's not anyone's responsibility. I mean, sometimes a little, of course, but it's not our whole responsibility if the world is as fucked up as it is right now. When you have a child, well, in the first years at least, I think that you have to sacrifice your own health. You have to sacrifice some of your lifetime and some of your life quality to raise that child or children. So literally when you are pregnant, during pregnancy, so I wouldn't want to experience this because maybe during pregnancy and after giving birth, there is a predominant lack of sleep. That's going to happen to most parents. You can experience the fear of losing a child. If anything happens to them, you're constantly worried. So, of course, you have levels of stress that are maybe higher. You experience more sadness and frustration through the different situations that you're facing with that child. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure to be raising a child, and I don't want to go through this. Then there is one big reason for me not to have children, is that some children and some people become assholes. There is a high chance that some people are going to become assholes, no matter how good you raise them, no matter how good the values are that you give to them, that you pass on to them. I don't want to bring anyone into existence with the risk that this person could become an asshole and contribute to someone else's suffering, contribute to someone else's trauma. And especially being a vegan and having been a vegan for 7 years, I do not want to bring someone into existence not having any control over this person's life, and knowing that this person at some point could decide not to live a vegan lifestyle anymore and therefore cause suffering to innocent animals or innocent people. That I do not want to be responsible for. No matter how you raise someone, you do not have any control over the rest of that person's life. And I do not have the means, the financial means to care for someone. And then, of course, there's the environmental reason. As I've mentioned already, the resources are getting already spared. They have been getting spared for quite a long time. And there are just too many people on this planet, and I do not want to be responsible for someone more on this planet who's maybe taking opportunities from other people, who's maybe taking some quality from other people. Obviously, I am doing that just by living. I am taking space and resources, but I did not wish to be born. I was not asked to be born, and that's the whole reason and core of my reasoning. Also, what I would advise is to definitely check out antinatalism. So that's what I was speaking of regarding not having the consent of someone. There is one book, I do not remember the writer anymore, but it's called Better Not to Have Been. But I will link basically any resources linked to the topic. I think there's also a vegan channel on YouTube that's also talking about antinatalism. There's a great Instagram account that's called Stop Having Children. They might have some videos on YouTube as well. I think I've mentioned everything I had here. If you have more questions, just reach out to me. That's it. I hope that this just brought you another perspective, that now maybe you will just think more critically about this topic. And I think when it comes to the parallels with veganism, if I had decided to have a child, just like with having animal companions, I will always go first for the adoption instead of creating one more life, or I would never bring someone into existence. I would rather adopt someone who's maybe already going through trauma and suffering, and I would want to help that individual, just like we did with our vegan dog Sky. We definitely didn't want to contribute to more suffering and more dogs ending on the streets, um, which happens when people basically go to a breeder and have dogs just because they want one specific dog, like they want a specific type of bag or clothing. Dogs and individuals are not objects, and I think that they should have the right to give consent as far as possible. And if someone's life is miserable and you can help them to have a better life, I would definitely adopt, not shop, and adopt, not create, not give birth to a child. Just something for your mind, food for thoughts. Thank you for listening, for taking the time, and I will definitely see you in another video. Bye.